Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to join you this evening. As always, as the Council of Governments, we're appreciative of the partnership and support with you and your city manager and your whole team. You've got a great team here. I don't have to tell you that. Of course, we're grateful Mr. Jernigan serving on our board and executive committee as well, and his leadership in the region. So let me talk a little bit about interbasin transfers, or IBTs as they're called today. This is a really, as you mentioned, Mayor, a very important issue for our area. So I'll talk a little bit about IBTs, the Catawba River Basin, Charlotte Water's request to transfer water out of the basin, the alternatives, our coalition, and the legislative study that's underway. For the benefit of the public, I'd point out what an interbasin transfer is. And it's a process where a local utility withdraws water from a river basin, in this case the Catawba River Basin, and uses it in its system, transfers and discharges that water into another river basin without returning it. If they return the water after it's gone through treatment process, that doesn't count as an IBT. But this case, they want to transfer it over from the Catawba to the Yadkin Rocky River Basin. So we've done a great deal of research on this already, and what the academic resources say is that this is not a good thing for source basins like the Catawba River Basin. It provides both negative impacts on the economic and environmental front, according to the research. Now, Charlotte Water has a 33 million gallons per day IBT certificate. Concord Kannapolis has about 20 million, of which 10 million comes from the Catawba, and then Mooresville has a grandfathered IBT of about 9.5 million. And this is what the map looks like in the North Carolina between the river basins and how they're regulated. You'll note there that the Catawba River Basin is one of the smaller river basins in the state. Now, the Catawba River Basin actually was the first river in the United States completely planned and developed for electricity production, and started out in the early 20th century and completed with the creation of Lake Norman in 1963, about 1,800 miles of shoreline. It's the most densely populated river basin in North Carolina. It serves about 2 million people through 18 different utilities. Now, the key takeaway here is that the Catawba River Basin is a threatened river. In fact, twice it's been named as the most endangered river in America over the last 20 years. And that is mainly due to the quote, unprecedented demand for clean water due to exponential population growth of the Charlotte metro area in North and South Carolina. So we have that to contend with. And then you throw in conditions like drought conditions, right? What does that mean for us? Well, this chart that I'm showing you, the way to read this chart is, this is the U.S. Drought Monitor of drought conditions in North Carolina dating back to 1998. The way to read it is the higher the bars are on the chart during that time period, the greater percentage of North Carolina was under drought conditions. The darker the colors, the more severe the drought was. So in 98 to 2002, we had a very severe drought, and in 07, 09, we had a very severe drought. Why is that important for our water systems? This is a diagram our engineering team put together. You see the water treatment plant there at the top on the right. They pump water out of our reservoirs during drought conditions. It goes from the blue line there as normal elevation, and it gets closer and closer to that red line. And that red line represents a lake level or river level where we have to have a certain amount of water above our water intakes for our water systems to function properly. Without that, we can't function, and then we don't have public water supply in that scenario, and we want to obviously avoid that. In the 98 to 2002 drought, it was one of the largest documented precipitation deficits on record, and it was primarily concentrated in our part of the state. That map that show there, the pink, the way to read that, it has to deal with water flows rates. The pink areas are where the most severe droughts occurred during that time frame. And during that time, Duke Energy said that water intakes in some reservoirs would be exposed if the drought had lasted another year from its 4 years. Now, the 2007-2009 drought was the most severe drought ever in North Carolina history. And at the same time, we've got documented where the city of Hickory was trying to reduce its water usage by 20%. We saw portions of the basin drop by over 8 to 10 feet during that time frame, as many of you and Miss Sandy certainly was the manager here when we were going through all that, and the precautions we had to take and the measures to employ to protect our water sources. Lake Norman dropped during that time frame to just 3.1 feet above the cooling intake for the nuclear power plant. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued pulling water from the Catawba River and still, to this day, loses more than 19% of every gallon it takes from the Catawba River. In fact, that's about 23 million gallons per day that it loses through leaks in its system. Now, Charlotte Water might say, the IBT isn't a big deal. This is just part of the process, all that, and it's not really significant. What we would say is point out this fact that Charlotte Water published its water conservation goals for extreme droughts of 10 to 20% in water reduction during those times. They use about 125 million gallons per day, so that equates to about a 12.5 to 25 million gallon conservation target, and their potential IBT is 63 million gallons. So what they are proposing is to transfer 2.5 to 5 times more water than they hope to conserve during extreme droughts. So either this is a big deal or their conservation targets are inadequate. One of those two things are occurring. So about their request. So they're currently transferred 33 million gallons per day from a certificate they were issued in 2002. That was supposed to last until 2030. They want to increase it now to 63 million gallons perhaps. And if you look at the map on the right side, that's Mecklenburg County. They pull the water out of the red dots from the intakes. They treat it at the blue squares there. That's their treatment plants. And then they're transferring across that purple line on the eastern side of Mecklenburg County, which flows to the Rocky River and Yadkin River basins. That results in, if you count the 30 million gallons per day that they want to increase it, and conservatively, in other words, estimating high on the usage, what that would translate to, that basically means they want to put another 300,000 people in eastern Mecklenburg County. That's approaching what our population is for our entire region at 375,000 people in our 4-county area. So this has lots of consequences for our region. It's driven a lot by the growth on the eastern side of Charlotte. As you see there, the population increases in surrounding counties, and it comes at a cost to western North Carolina that we're significantly concerned about. Now, previous studies that Morganton belongs to a group called the Catawba Water Management Group, as do the other water producing utilities up and down the river chain in North and South Carolina, and it does studies to plan for coordination of utilizing the river system and planning ahead. And the last time it did its water supply plan, which is in the process of updating now, but in 2014, that plan cited studies that said that by mid-century, the Catawba River Basin's reservoirs, the safe yield for those reservoirs would be exhausted. That's 2050. Due mostly to the continued population economic growth, and that would be unsustainable once we reach that point during drought conditions. That safe yield becomes very important during drought conditions. Keep in mind also, our engineers have looked at the availability of water in the Catawba River, and we've mapped all the water flows going back to the 1960s and charted that, and it shows that actually it's not even. Actually, the flow of the Catawba River appears to be decreasing over the last half century. So we're using more of the water, and Charlotte wants to transfer more water out of the Catawba River Basin at the same time while the water flow is decreasing over time. This results in concentrations of pollutants and can drive up the cost of our treatment of all the utility systems up and down the chain when the water levels drop, and it results in lower flows. Now, at the same time, water rates in Charlotte are more affordable as a percentage of median household income than 90% of other North Carolina utilities. And Charlotte customers pay less the same amount of water. At the same time, they're losing 19% of their water. This chart on the right side shows the black dot is the median affordability for all utilities in North Carolina. The blue dot is the utilities in our region. We do well. We're more affordable than the state average. And then you see Charlotte all the way over the left side, the orange dot, and that shows that they basically have a very cost-effective system and very cheap water rates. Now, normally, I'd say great for them. That's good. But they want to use that at our expense by transferring the water out of it. And so this means that interbasin transfers means cheaper water for Charlotte and more expensive water at the same time for everyone else in the Catawba River Basin. Now, the legal impacts of this is the more of these IBTs, especially the large ones that we approve, the more precedent this creates. And so that's why we have to resist this and consider the long-term implications of it all. And so what are the alternatives? Well, Charlotte's already looked at that. They looked at them in 2002, and they want to keep doing what they're doing now, which is transferring water over to the Rocky and Yadkin River basins, which results in maximum harm to other communities in the Catawba River Basin, maximum benefit to Charlotte. They have two primary options. There may be others, but there's two primary options they can take to avoid this IBT. One is to purchase or take water from the Yadkin River Basin, or return the water after they've used it through the wastewater treatment process back to the Catawba River Basin. Because again, that doesn't count if you return the water. They looked at the cost of that back in 2001, and the cost of one of those options, or each of those options, was $16 or $82 million each. And they didn't choose that. Now they're saying, according to their estimates, that each option is over $800 million each. You do one of those options to solve the problem. Now, that's a 10 to 50 times increase over that 20-year period. We're not saying we accept those estimates at this point, but even if you did for the purposes of this argument, consider that they have a $651 million annual budget, and they plan about $2.3 billion in capital projects over the next 5 years. According to avoiding an IBT would only require about a 12% increase in their Charlotte Water capital budget over the next 15 years to avoid that IBT or eliminate it. So at the same time, they've not invested in those water source projects in the 21st century. They've backed recently a sales tax increase for transit infrastructure. They received COVID money of $141 million that they did not use on infrastructure that they could have. And bottom line, Charlotte pays less for water. They receive federal funds for water infrastructure. They supported a tax increase for other non-water infrastructure. They have the means, they just don't have the desire to pursue alternatives for water. Now, in response, local governments in our region and McDowell County have formed a coalition to resist this and its negative impacts on our communities. Morganton is part of that coalition, and the Council of Governments is coordinating that effort at the request of our local governments in those 5 counties. And our key points would be is our region's future could be limited because of these large IBTs. And we're not opposed to Charlotte growing, we just don't want it to occur at our expense. And the limited resources of the Catawba River should not be used to subsidize huge growth outside of our river basin. And Charlotte should implement policies and infrastructure to avoid the IBT. And lastly, IBTs are going to make the impacts of our severe droughts worse for our communities. Now, last year we were successful in getting House Bill 850 passed, which placed a moratorium on large interbasin transfers exceeding 15 million gallons from increasing until March of 27. It also directed that the North Carolina Collaboratory at UNC Chapel Hill to study the issue, and they're supposed to study the statutory process for approval of surface water transfers such as this and provide recommendations. We've got a series of recommendations we want them to look at, and we're engaged with them on. One would be a shot clock, to use a basketball term, for large interbasin transfers, where once you initiate an IBT, you've got a 15 or a 20-year period of time to build the infrastructure necessary to eliminate your IBT or avoid it. And then second is a percentage of their income ought to be placed into a drought mitigation fund for impacted communities to use if an IBT is approved within that relevant basin. That could be used to lower the intakes for the water system or provide interconnections between utility systems that would allow them to operate in emergency conditions during droughts. So what we're asking our utility members, coalition members to do is to engage with your state legislators to use using these key points. We'll have additional data and points for you along the way. Also, we're going to send you more information about engaging with UNC Collaboratory to share your local perspective and a letter as they gear up with that study that will be due in early 2027. The next 50 years of growth in our region will be determined by this issue. So we want to make sure everyone uses every opportunity to keep this issue at the forefront because it really impacts both our future, our children's future, and our grandchildren's future, especially poignant that we're considering 250 years of history for our country. Thinking about the history makes me think about, Mayor, as you mentioned, the future and what it lies and what we leave behind for our successors and our children and grandchildren. So I'll be glad to answer any questions of the council.
Questions for council? I do have one, Anthony. Most of that water going into Lake Norman for them to draw obviously originates pretty much in Lake James through the Catawba River and Limble River, which means they'll actually have to get more water down there. They've got to draw Lake James down, Lake Roadhiss, Lake Lookout to get it into Lake Norman. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So the river system is managed by Duke Energy.
Correct.
And so it's very much interrelated. And so to maintain those necessary water levels for public utility intakes, they will move the water up and down the chain accordingly to provide adequate water. And what we saw in those previous droughts is that Lake James is our last line of defense when it comes to droughts, severe droughts. It is our fail-safe. And so if we pull down too much water, that's our Alamo in terms of water supply.
Thank you. Other questions? We really encourage the public to get involved in this, contacted their legislatures in Raleigh, because eventually they'll have the say-so on issuing that. No, it's the Environmental Management Commission, correct?
So we're asking to change the law in North Carolina so that these large IBTs are temporary and not permanent, but the study will do it. But the Environmental Management Commission is the entity that the General Assembly has designated as the one that approves or disapproves these requests.
Will your PowerPoint be available on our website? I think that's important. It's very good.
Thank you.
Great information. Keep up the struggle. We're for you, and we hope we can do anything we can do. Please let us know.
All on.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you.